The deity of Revati is Pushan, who is referred to as the Lord of the Animals. He is also the Lord of the Paths who understands the way to any destination. He is also referred to as the Lord who knows the way from earth to heaven, and is also considered the guide of the souls. The guna of Revati is sattva, 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 suggesting one who is no longer blinded by the dark sheets of mundane consciousness, having made his journey from the stage of an animal to one that is beyond human. Therefore, he is fit to guide other animals in their journey from mere beasts to something higher than common man. For this reason, this nakshatra is also related to shepherds, an exalted consciousness guiding the herd of sheep. The intelligence of an animal is much too feeble to comprehend that which a more advanced intelligence has to offer. So what we find in this relationship between the shepherd and the sheep is a shepherd whose ways, whose language is too abstract, too strange to be comprehended by them. For this reason, the shepherd communicates through signs and sounds and gestures, making use of simple communication tools that conceal more abstract, advanced intelligence. It is interesting that Mercury is generally debilitated in Pisces, because direct communication of knowledge and wisdom from a higher intelligence to a lower one is now virtually impossible. Instead, the shepherd must trick the sheep by goading him down certain paths for their own advancements. The Revati intelligence can no longer express with clear language all the great wisdom it has to impart. Instead, it deceives those of lesser intelligence into roads and paths that will eventually lead them into greater intelligence of their own. It is in Revati where we are introduced to the concept of the sinister fool, who seems at first to be goofy and silly and playful, and yes, again, even sinister, but he in fact conceals under his clownery how wise and how aware he is. And his guidance can be interpreted as leading others astray, which is why he may gain a reputation as a figure of evil. Revati naturally is also a nakshatra related to persuasion, and is one of the most persuasive of the 27. Naturally, it would have to be highly persuasive in order to serve as a guide for wandering beasts. The deity of this nakshatra, who is also related to the Greek god Pan, is learned in the art of how to stir someone down a path. Of course, the ultimate way of persuading anyone is by figuring out where it is that they want to get and convincing them that your itinerary, your way of getting there, is the better route. The least effective method of persuasion is to get someone to let go of something that they already want or of a place that they already want to go. To convince someone to let go of their desires is nearly impossible and risks breeding mistrust. A mental image to keep then of Revati Nakshatra is that of a carrot on a stick, as this very much describes the persuasive tactics used. Again, understanding the fundamental desire of an individual, and then as the god Pushan, drawing a path that helps them arrive there. Now let us consider the symbolism of freedom and independence, and even nonconformism within this nakshatra. Of course, we know that this nakshatra relates to nourishment and abundance. A child is his most independent when he has been properly cared for by his parents. The opposite is also true. A child is his most dependent and insecure and least likely to appropriately individuate when he has not been properly loved and cared for. When someone lacks love and connection, they are that much more likely to desperately seek it out and even go as far as sacrificing their own ideas and individuality if it means that they will be part of a group or a relationship that promises to give them the love that they have been deprived of as a child. But on the other hand, a child that has been well fed with love and affection, as well as nurtured in other relevant areas, is not only capable of nurturing others as he himself is satiated, but he also possesses the confidence and strength to be independent and autonomous. Let us compare and contrast Aslesha and Revati. Aslesha is a nakshatra of attachment and clinging, precisely because its symbolism is that of not having been nourished by one's family, and specifically one's mother, and so there is great dependence in Aslesha. Revati, on the other hand, is a profound independence owing to how deeply nourished and emotionally satiated it is by its family and connections, that it can even journey alone and without them. Another element of independence and freedom and nonconformism is owing to the relationship to the god Pan, who is an expression of Pushan, who is the god of the wild and the forest, existing outside of the conventional bounds of society. Pushan is said to be the god of the past. Now let us enter into the personality section. Before we begin, I kindly ask that you like, comment, and subscribe to boost my channel and this video. And also, if you'd like access to hundreds of original articles on astrology, please check out my Patreon. And also on my Patreon are some very rare posts on this very nakshatra, Revati. It should be remembered that every placement, every sign, every nakshatra has multiple expressions, and in this video I will be speaking of a few different expressions simultaneously, but this is by no means exhaustive. Let us begin. Starting off with some of its more manipulative tendencies, remember, the ultimate way of persuading anyone is by figuring out where it is that they want to get and convincing them that your itinerary, your way of getting there, is the better route. To convince somebody out of their desires is nearly impossible. And so, for this reason, Revati natives tend to have manipulation skills that are very, very subtle. So much so, one wouldn't even realize they are being maneuvered by the Revati native, because from the outside, it would seem as though they are co-conspiring in your favor to help you to achieve your desired results, when in reality, the Revati native could be using you yourself as a vehicle to get where it is that they themselves want to go. The Revati native could quite literally use another person as a vehicle, the same way one would ride an animal, dangling a carrot before the beast, deceiving him into thinking it is headed in the direction of its own desires, when really the Revati native may be using them for their own agenda. Revati natives are not often too interested in changing people and changing their personalities or behavior too much. Instead, they allow people to be themselves as they are and simply try to study their motivations to be able to better understand, maneuver, and therefore goad or manipulate them better. Revati natives are very concerned with the motivation behind action, because that can inform one as to the desire within a person and where it is that that person is hoping to get through their actions. Like for instance, let us say that you're trying to get your child to clean his room, but he is resistant. You wish your child were more responsible as he never takes care of his chores. Many parents would threaten their child to do as they say. Other parents would resent the fact that their child is not more conscientious. But here is one possible example of how a Revati parent would handle the situation. The Revati parent would try to understand the base motivation of their child and study their behavior. The Revati parent may realize that it is because the task is boring that their child has no interest in them, and so the parent may try to make the activity more exciting. The Revati parent may notice that their child loves video games, and so she may tell her child to treat doing chores as though they were video games. She, the Revati mother, may even buy a whiteboard and create a point system to reward him for every accomplished task, and she may even get in on the game herself. And in the end of the week, if her son had earned enough points, she may decide to reward him somehow. Revati actually is one of the most controlling nakshatras, naturally owing to its symbolism of managing herds. From a young age, they could experiment with various techniques of how to get other people to behave exactly how they wish they would behave, from charm to humor to even outright violence. When they get older, they are often more practiced in the sort of methods that are most effective for controlling others. They often realize from a young age that the more direct, more aggressive means of trying to control others are often limited in their effect, as people typically do not respond well to aggression, and not in a sustainable way. As they get older, they often develop more subtle, more indirect ways of influencing others, ways that almost make it seem as though they don't even care to control others, ways that almost make it seem like they aren't even trying to control others, but they have the most developed ability in indirect influence. People very much enjoy the illusion of autonomy. Revati understands this, and so often Revati would try to offer this to people. It would try to create a situation that would have others feel like they are in control, when in reality they are being guided by the subtle hand of the Revati. They are often naturally comedic, but they tend to prefer irony and a play on words, and they excel at banter. They love irony because they enjoy things that from the outside appear to be one thing, but after some study are revealed to be something totally opposite. Even when they want to make fun of others or insult others, they usually prefer irony because, being a soft nakshatra, they usually don't prefer aggression. Revati, Jyeshta, and Aslesha all love banter, sarcasm, irony, and they are often very quick-witted. They always have something to say. They always have a comeback up their sleeves, and often they tend to form friendships with each other or with other people with whom they can spar with, because often other types of people can't keep up with them, can't handle them, or are just too offended by them. Revati men specifically can come across as emotionally distant and emotionally cold, though they can possess deep empathy for others. This is of course owing to the deeply sattvic nature of this nakshatra, as sattva is a quality of clarity that is not muddied, confused, or shadowed by such things as strong emotion. Sattva is also the guna of indifference. The opposite is the case for the nakshatra of tamas, which is chitra, which has a reputation for being thrown about by its own strong emotions. Revati men can be very difficult to influence and difficult to persuade. They often maintain a level of external serenity owing to their indifference to much of what is happening outside of them. Revati in general can come off as rather off-putting because the men can come off as too independent and not interested in common social activities. Revati natives, owing to this signification of possessing an intelligence that goes beyond the mundane, human intelligence, often carry a mischievous air, as though they know a secret that others do not, and they refuse to tell others. They can carry a sarcastic or ironic look, and sometimes even carry an air of superiority that others can sense. Revati natives tend to have many hobbies and tend to be quite prolific. They are often quite disciplined and invest a lot of their energies into their own inner worlds to such an extent that they have a reduced need for social interactions. For this reason, they can often be deeply introverted and come off as disinterested in social events, which may even add to an intimidating aura, because they tend to come off as not needing anyone and so are often very composed and gentle in social situations, not usually running around trying to impress or please, and they also tend to not care too much if they come across as not very cool or interesting, or if people accuse them of being nerdy or geeky. It is easier for Revati natives to not care about what other people think because their identities are often more deeply invested outside of social dynamics and social interactions. Again, they may invest their identities more so in their hobbies and the like. They are often self-taught in various fields, as they tend to not wait to have a teacher or a book to learn new things. They are often so curious and wish to master certain disciplines and skills that, even in the absence of a proper resource like a teacher, they will start experimenting until they develop a practical understanding of whatever it is that they are trying to learn. In a more negative and arrogant sense, this symbolism of the shepherd as separate from the sheep can often breed a superiority complex within these natives, as they may walk around believing themselves to be better, more elevated, more evolved than others. They may, at their worst, look down upon others who try to conform and consider them to be somehow less intelligent than they are or inferior in some way. It must be remembered that Revati does in fact excel at social interactions, as they are very poised, well-mannered, polite, and even highly charming, but often they simply do not care to involve themselves too deeply with such things. When they decide that they want to be part of society, they often easily and quickly become relatively popular owing to their developed charm, but they just often choose not to. On account of being very different and not caring too much about social activities, they can either become loners and other times even become vulnerable to social ostracization and even bullying, because society tends to punish those who do not conform. The men can come off as rather eccentric. The women of this nakshatra can seem to others as being especially rebellious and hard to control, because they are often indifferent to rules. Neither the men nor the women care to adhere strictly to the norms of their gender, because the men can be quite feminine and the women can also behave quite masculine, though they are still very good at adhering to gender norms when they need to or for an advantage. I would not use the words gender fluid to describe Revati. Instead, I would use the words gender neutral, because deep down they do not really identify too strongly with the concept of gender or care to define themselves in any strict identity, but they will simply play with the concept of gender and identity for different advantages. This is different from a nakshatra like Hasta that is more so definitively gender fluid, because Hasta natives often do wish to concretely define themselves, and yet they struggle to do so because they often feel like multiple things at different days. One day, a Hasta may feel masculine and so wish to identify as being a man. At other times, they may feel more feminine and wish to identify that way. At other times, they may feel more non-binary. And then at other times, they may even wish to keep their gender identity private and not share it because they themselves don't even understand their own feelings on the matter. So, Revati is gender neutral because deep down they don't care to define themselves, but they will perform whatever expression they need to for an advantage. Whereas Hasta is gender fluid because they do care about defining themselves, but also feel like they belong in different categories at different phases of their lives. A Revati man, for example, may not feel very masculine internally, but wouldn't care to call himself non-binary. Whereas a Hasta man, if he didn't feel very masculine in the inside, he would feel burdened with trying to define the right terms, the right language, and even the right aesthetic to perfectly express how he feels internally. Because Hasta Nakshatra relates to making concrete every abstraction, every emotion, and so they are very concerned with defining things and definitions. Revati tends to possess a strong balance of both masculine and feminine energy. This is again why the men can come off as simultaneously definitively masculine and yet at the same time have certain eccentric or feminine mannerism, sit in a cross-legged way, or act in a very refined, sophisticated way overall. And overall, they are quite genteel. Mercury, which is the lord of this nakshatra, is referred to as the prince in the court of the planets. And the men of Revati, more than any other type of man, are the most stereotypically gentlemanly. And again, when we think of gentlemen, we think of men who at the same time are very masculine and yet with many feminine mannerisms and attributes like elegance and courtesy.
3 top grooming tips for guys. There's 3 steps, like exfoliate, bit of serum, moisturizer, and that is it. Leave it at that.
In fact, both the men and the women can be very genteel in general and are often described as naturally elegant, poised, and cultured. To further sustain this, consider some of the key names of Mercury according to astrologer Andrew Foss. One of Mercury's names is extremely genteel, having the highest sense of decorum and courtesy. Another of Mercury's names is possess of exceptional politeness and good conduct.
And what about Stewie?
Stewie,
How did you come up with the idea of a very highly sophisticated gay baby?
I'm like, Rex Harrison was always so funny to me. Why don't I just do that voice and make it the baby? Well, it's funny. The gay thing came much later in the game, or the possibility that he might be gay came much later in the game.
Well, in America, if you're sophisticated, you're gay.
Yeah. And if you're British, you're gay.
Of course. Yeah. Well, that's true.
But
Can't believe this is happening to me. I can never go back to school again.
Oh, yes, Meg, yes, everything was going swimmingly for you until this. Yes, this is the thing that will ruin your reputation. Not your years of grotesque appearance or awkward social graces, or that Felix Ungarish way you clear your sinuses. No, it's this. Do you hear yourself talk?
On the subject of charm, this is an extension of their persuasive abilities. They are naturally good at getting other people to do things indirectly, which actually extends to seduction, as this is also one of the most practically seductive nakshatras, learned in the various ways of charming a person. Natives of this nakshatra from a young age also often experiment in various seductive techniques, and the men can be especially sexually hungry. Revati, but Jayesha specifically, are related to pickup artists, men who are practicing the art of how to quickly seduce a woman, even going out of their way to hit on random women on the streets, experimenting with various conversational styles to see which one has the most effect. They are very much concerned with the art of how to charm women. The topic of seduction and nakshatras is an interesting one because there are various seductive nakshatras, but they differ. Revati excels in seduction because the natives tend to have a strong balance of both masculine and feminine energy. For instance, it is often said that to be the most seductive man, you must be masculine enough to satisfy a woman, but feminine enough to understand them. As a man, you must possess a masculine vehicle, like a strong voice, a tall stature, and a definitively masculine presence. And yet, the way you operate the vehicle of your male body must be with an understanding of the feminine. You have to learn how to speak in a way that may disarm her defenses and call her towards you. This is what Revati excels at because both the men and women have a strong balance of both masculine and feminine energy. We can even quickly explore the differences between a few nakshatras. Aslesha is often considered to be traditionally seductive, but in truth, this nakshatra is more powerful for women than it is for men, because this nakshatra is so passive, so withdrawn, so feminine, that the men with Aslesha may actually suffer with these placements, because it works against the more forward-moving energy of masculinity. Women with Aslesha, on the other hand, may excel because this placement really brings out the more passive, unassertive, and docile qualities of femininity. So Aslesha is a seductive nakshatra, but mostly for women, because it is too feminine to be of much use to the male constitution. But in future videos, we may try to differentiate the different seductive styles of the different nakshatras. Although for more on that, you may purchase my book, Sex and the Stars, which also goes into some detail on the different seductive styles of the nakshatras. Now, going back to Revati, they tend to have a very natural eye for detail and are often eclectic in their style. And they are often the types to pull off any look because pretty much any aesthetic may look good on them. For instance, the grunge aesthetic, the bohemian aesthetic, the goth aesthetic. In general, they tend to love self-decoration, as even the names of Mercury relate to self-decoration. Like for instance, another of Mercury's names is fond of ornaments, having delightful ornaments. Another name of Mercury is beautifully decorated. Something that we found with Pisces in general, but Revati specifically, is that they tend to excel as fashion models. And let us explore the reasons as to why this is. Revati Nakshatra is naturally the most detached from its own humanity and its own personality because it is sattva, 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 suggesting that its consciousness is not grimed by attachments to identity or ego. And so because its sense of self does not suffer from attachments to identity, it facilitates change in a chameleon-like nature. Different energies are compatible with different people, owing to the identities that they are attached to. So for instance, certain colors literally reject certain people. Certain textures literally reject other people because these colors and textures are incompatible with their nature. But if you're someone who is not attached to any identity and possesses more of a sattvic nature that is never sullied by attachments, then you are never incompatible to any aesthetic, and you can easily embody any aesthetic if you so choose. And this is why, as models, Revati can be one of the most versatile because no matter what scenario you place them in, they never seem out of place. Revati is the nakshatra of the paths, and in order to travel the various different paths, one requires various types of vehicles. And in the context of the human psychology, one possesses various psychological vehicles, switching into various personalities and choosing the one most appropriate for the terrain you're trying to traverse. So again, this nakshatra is very chameleon-like because it sees personality as a vehicle, and depending on where they are trying to go, what doors they are trying to open, or what advantages they are hoping to extract out of a situation, they may change their vehicle at will. This is also one of the reasons why they make natural actors, because it goes back to the idea of attachment to identity. Many people feel weird modifying their mannerisms, their accents, and ways of speaking because deep down they feel too attached to these more superficial aspects of their identity. But if you have a more relaxed relationship to the concept of identity, you don't mind modifying your mannerisms and your general behavior because you don't see these things as being fundamentally you to begin with. Because this nakshatra has so much to do with abundance in every aspect, another negative expression of these natives are people who are spoiled and people who suffer from affluenza, which is not considered a real disease by many, but is described as the psychological and social effects of affluence. Affluenza is essentially the disease of wealth, the psychological and even spiritual dangers that come with great wealth, especially those born into wealth. In general, when discussing Revati, contemplating affluenza and the nature of this condition teaches us a lot about the nature of this very wealthy nakshatra, to Dhanishta, which is another nakshatra that signifies great wealth. It is a portmanteau of affluence and influenza, and is used most commonly by critics of consumerism. For instance, Often people who are very wealthy and belong to a higher class are said to possess reduced empathy for those who are in classes far below them, because they simply cannot relate to those of a lower class, and they may consider themselves to be inherently superior to those people. And for this reason, upper class individuals may justify being rude, being condescending, and otherwise dismissive of lower class individuals. Other traits that Revati may possess is being indifferent to rules, perceiving rules as not applying to them, and never really suffering the consequences for their own actions. This is a nakshatra that is related to a life of ease, having things come easy to one without any effort required. The nakshatra of Revati is where we arrive at the understanding that the world exists for play. And so the natives of this nakshatra wish to live lives of play and often also tend to be highly materialistic, as even the deity of Revati, Pushan, was known for his indulgent tendencies. So indulgent that even his own teeth were knocked out owing to his lack of self-control. There are, for this reason, very strong consumerist tendencies in Revati, where they have very high and refined tastes and are not easy to please and are very sensually demanding and can even become very bad-tempered and even aggressive when their sensual desires are not met. And so they are one of the main nakshatras that perfectly fits the spoiled brat trope in the media, along with the Nishta and a couple of others. Note that there are various placements that can create a love of luxury, but most of the nakshatras can be perfectly content if they don't have the best things and won't become horribly tempered on account of that, unlike Revati. Revati natives are oftentimes not satisfied living lives of minimalism and often aspire to excessive wealth in order to be able to indulge the most. As children, they can also be hard to please, as they can be very demanding of their parents and can also turn cruel when they do not get their way. This is interesting because Revati at an early age represents the calves, as the basis below is the calves, and so there is this visual of the calves sucking and sucking and sucking the milk from the parent cow until it feels well fed and satiated of all of its sensual desires. And often Revati children do tend to have parents that go out of their way to satisfy every whim of their Revati child. So again, because Revati represents the shepherd overlooking the sheep, and because this nakshatra carries themes of playfulness, we often find the shepherd playing games on the sheep. Revati natives may have such a love of play that it may even turn sinister, as they may play with other people's lives for the sake of laughs. Though this nakshatra does carry themes of deep empathy, it also finds much of life amusing, and may even find suffering amusing. This actually calls to mind another story of the deity of this nakshatra. When Shiva was angry because of his father-in-law's actions, that of banning him from the sacrifice and allowing his beloved wife to commit suicide, Pushan, the deity of Revati, was seen among the crowds, laughing, finding amusement in the pain of someone else. It was for this reason that Shiva, now directing his anger at him, kicked him in the teeth. So Revati, despite being capable of great compassion, still finds the nature of suffering to be amusing and may either laugh at its own suffering, the suffering of others, or can even go as far as to inflict suffering on others, but again, only for the sake of amusement, and not really owing to a true profound cruelty. But this is again what gives rise to the idea of the sinister fool within this nakshatra. Thank you so much for watching.